Hu Guan Hui Guan Opera House creeps into number 10. This building was initially intended to house the thousands of people who had lost their homes, and this is during World War II. However, this building was constructed on an ancient graveyard, so it is said that these angry spirits are haunting the building. Today, this building has been converted into an opera house, and several tourists have claimed that they hear a screaming voice coming from a graveyard when no one is even there. Well, the yelling is obviously coming from down under. And legend says that if you throw a stone in the graveyard, an angry spirit will scold you forever. I don't think I'm gonna be brave enough to even try it. There's absolutely no way. Burma Inn stabs its way into number 9. A guest was staying at this hotel when he was poisoned years ago by the head chef. The chef was so overwhelmed by guilt, so he stabbed himself to death that same night. Legend has it that the ghost of the murdered man now haunts the hotel, constantly looking for the head chef so that he can get some revenge. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I wouldn't ever want to become the head chef. Now, in at number 8, we're talking about Dragon Lodge.
On the edge of a mountain in Hong Kong with a beautiful view lies a cursed mansion called Dragon Lodge. Built before World War II, it is said that the original owner of the property went bankrupt. The second owner of the property died inside the house. It is believed that the Japanese occupied this property and the front courtyard was the location for a beheading of 7 Catholic nuns.
During the time when the Japanese had control, 7 Catholic nuns were executed here. Neighbors regularly complained about hearing weird and scary houses, and this is throughout the night. Oh, and also the last person to live here said that they saw a ghost of a child with thick matted hair, and they were wearing a white lace nightgown. Yeah, I think I'd move far away too if I saw this creepy ghost. Chaonei Church creeps into number 7. So this church was built in the 20th century by the Catholic Church, and it housed British missionaries who were living in Beijing. Local legend has it that the priest who originally helped build this church disappeared without a trace within the walls of the church, and later on, a woman committed suicide in the church. People have claimed that you can hear her screams in the corridor of the church, and you can even see her spirits lingering in the halls. People have also said that once they entered the church, they feel a sense of doom and uneasy.
The building is in the care of the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Beijing. However, it still remains abandoned. People who live near the home say they can often hear the wailing screams of a woman coming from within. The story goes that the building was once owned by a high-ranking nationalist officer who fled the country for Taiwan following the communist victory.
The Imperial Palace, Beijing, makes its way onto this list at number 6. This is without a doubt a staple when you're visiting China, but the Imperial Palace is also known to be haunted with poltergeists and ghosts. The Imperial Palace was built over 600 years ago, and it was the site of many executions, betrayals, and murders. When the palace was opened up to the public in the 1940s, staff members and visitors would report seeing a woman dressed in black, and when you go to speak to her, she would turn around, but she would have no face. Tac Tac School creeps us out in at number 5. This old and spooky abandoned school used to be a site of a Japanese massacre during World War II. This place is infamously known as the most haunted school in Hong Kong because the girls' washroom has the ghost of an old principal who committed suicide there, and she is wearing a red dress. She will shriek at anything who is brave enough to get close to her. High Street Community Center, Hong Kong takes the number 4 spot. This building used to be occupied by Japanese soldiers who were executed and tortured thousands of disobedient Hong Kongers. Later on, this place was converted into a mental asylum, but it has been abandoned since the 1960s.
That's the second floor. People say that sometimes at night you can hear screaming from up there. Sometimes there'll be a demonstrated figure swinging through the flames up there. And so sometimes at night, screaming can be heard from here. So, you don't know if you're going to see putting things up on that floor. Ghost, headless ghost running across there. I mean, inside that, across the corridors.
Well, rumors have it that you can still hear the screams through the halls, and a creepy figure roams the building, and if you make eye contact with it, the figure will burst into flames. Okay, so up next, number 3 is the White House compound. This is an ancient colonial building that used to be called the Mount Davis concentration camp. This used to be a place where drug-induced torture, interrogations, and murders happened. So it's safe to say that this place is probably super haunted. Some people have reported that they have heard some loud, creepy screams at night, and they have seen some headless figures through the windows. Bride's Pool falls onto this list at number 2. Don't let this picture fool you. I know this place looks beautiful and serene, but I wouldn't recommend you visit there. And that's because a group of pirates once murdered all of the neighboring villagers and dumped their bodies in this pool of water. So now water ghosts supposedly haunts this area, and they're still waiting for a helpless kid to fall in so they can possess its body. The Great Wall of China tops this list in at number 1. This is regarded as one of the world's greatest wonders. It is known for its 5,000-mile long extension and stunning views. But during the construction, an estimated 1 million soldiers died while building the wall. Now, visitors have claimed that they have seen the ghosts of the soldiers walking around the wall, or they have reported that they have even heard marching steps. The north part of the wall is where the most ghost activity is reported. Lots of hikers have died around this area from very strange and unexplainable accidents.
Coming in at number 10, we have the new owners. The Conjuring House has actually just been purchased by paranormal investigators Corey and Jennifer Heinzen. They couldn't resist the opportunity to buy the property. Corey moved in before his wife and set up recording equipment to see if they could track the many ghosts said to haunt the property. However, he has claimed that he is absolutely terrified of being there alone, and I don't blame him. The Heinzens recently spoke to the press in August 2019, and Corey himself said, "We've had lights flashing in rooms, and when I say lights flashing in rooms, it's rooms that don't even have light bulbs in yet. When something takes a painting that's on the wall but not only knocks it down, but actually knocks it down at an angle that it lands on something and it's upright, you know what? It's really difficult to debunk that." That's what he said. The pair also claimed to have seen a black mist, heard voices, and unidentified footsteps. With a paranormal investigator now in the home, it seems like we're going to likely be hearing more from the property, so stay tuned, I guess, for Harrisville 2.0. Next up, we have the next owners at number 9. Andrea Perron claimed that everyone who has lived in the house that we know of has experienced some hauntings. Some have left screaming and running for their lives, whilst others have been kinda cooler about it. When asked to give an example, she claimed that the people who bought the house off her family, the Perron family, and begun restoration on the property actually had a horrifying experience that they didn't want to speak about. She was speaking to the Tallapoosa Journal when she said, "The man who moved in after us to begin the restoration on the house when we sold it left screaming without his car, without his tools, without his clothing. He never went back to the house, and consequently the people who owned it, the adjacent landowners, never moved in, and it sat vacant for years." I'm just asking what he was doing restoring this house without his clothes on. Just a question. Just a question. It's not a question I'm gonna get an answer to though, because apparently he is not keen to speak to the press or anyone about his experience at the house ever again. This makes me feel really icky. At number 8, we have the 7 dead soldiers. It seems that during the Perron family's time at the home, a particularly nasty spirit began haunting 8-year-old Cindy in her bedroom. The apparition reportedly was childlike and repeated over and over again that there were 7 dead soldiers buried in the wall. Honestly, really creepy. Rhode Island, where the house is, was once the battleground between British, American, and French forces in the 1778 Battle of Rhode Island. Now, this battle killed 68 people and left a further 68 missing. The house, as you may or may not know, was established in 1736, so perhaps the soldiers buried here are from the times of conflict seen in the eastern New England states. Coming in at number 7, we have the bangs and the shakes. The most common occurrences in the house are said to be banging doors and objects shaking of their own free will, at times even the house shaking. Now, the Perron children said that they would be awoken to spirits shaking their bed, and occasionally they'd wake up to the odd hair yank or leg yank. Not nice. The new owners of the home have also reiterated that the house does indeed shake. Now, an earthquake in Rhode Island is pretty unusual but not unheard of, although it seems that this quake only affected the Harrisville farm. Coming into number 6, we have the phantom flies. In Andrea Perron's book, she wrote that the house would be suddenly and inexplicably infested with flies at strange times. She explained that the houseflies would appear deep in the middle of winter. Flies, of course, are far more common in the warm, humid months of the year, and for those of you familiar with the harsh winters of New England, it certainly isn't the climate there. Andrea referred to these flies as the devil's pets, and she claimed that there would be so many of them that they would form little fly clumps, which sounds horrifying. In her book, she wrote clusters of them would huddle together as if plotting the next move. She claimed it was far more than an infestation. She said it was a manifestation. She added that, strangely, the flies would disappear as soon as they appeared. When the Warrens arrived to investigate the house, Lorraine claimed that the flies were actually there with a purpose. They were an omen, a harbinger of evil to come. Blimey. Next up, we have the uninvited guests. What are you realistically more scared of? Ghost intruders or real intruders? In America, a place of guns. The whole Conjuring saga deals with unwanted spirits. It turns out the owners before the most recent were utterly plagued by creepy fans trying to catch a glimpse of the supposedly haunted house. Former owner Norma Sutcliffe spoke out against the intruders. She said the biggest fear is every day that we live with the fact that we don't know what may happen. She said that she received calls in the middle of the night and threats that people were going to burn down her house because of its full evil. Norma claimed that she did not believe the house was haunted and had lived in peace in the property since 1987. That peace was disturbed when the Conjuring movie franchise shone a light on her home. Speaking to Inside Edition, Norma said,
"They think they have a right, and that makes me so angry. We no longer have any sense of peace. No, privacy is totally gone."
She also claimed that strangers have pulled down her fence, which is a lot to deal with. Next up, we have the blood orange. In Andrea's book, she discusses the haunted kitchen in more detail. It seems that there is one particularly horrifying story from the room involving a time that food in the home was, I guess poisoned with evil? Is that what we're going with? I think it is. She claims that her mother Carolyn started peeling an orange when she saw blood trickling from it. At first, she thought she'd accidentally cut herself with the knife that she was peeling with, but then she couldn't find a wound. To keep her youngest daughters from wandering in and becoming frightened, allegedly she hastily cleaned up the blood from the skin and the floor and threw the orange in the bin. Some skeptics believe that the orange was just a California blood orange, but honestly, I've had a blood orange, delicious, and its juice doesn't look or smell anything like actual blood. It would be difficult to mistake the two. Next up, we have the Arnolds. Before the Perron family moved into the home, it was known as the Old Arnold Farm. It seems that 8 generations of the Arnold family lived and died in the house. Emphasis on the died. It seems that the Arnolds were met with a lot of bad luck and untimely deaths. It's claimed that a lot of the previous residents died under suspicious circumstances or committed suicide. It is said that one of the previous tenants, 93-year-old Mrs. Arnold, hung herself in the barn. This narrative has actually been crossed with the story of BATHSHEBA, the witch in the movie The Conjuring, and is referenced in this scene. The Perron family believed that one of the spirits that haunted the home was that of Johnny Arnold, who allegedly committed suicide there. It's said that he would watch over the family. He was a benevolent presence. He would appear to the children, but as soon as they made eye contact with him, he'd disappear. Coming into number 2, we have the Seance. One of the scariest moments in the Conjuring movie is the seance in the basement. It seems that this is based on the real life event when Ed and Lorraine Warren visited the house. Andrea speaks about it in her books, and she's also spoken about it in a number of on-air interviews, including for San Antonio Living in 2014. She said that the real seance took place in the dining room and was much scarier than anything shown into the movie.
There was a seance that happened when the Warrens were in the house with you. What happened during that seance?
It was far more intense than anything that they could have portrayed on film.
Andrea said that the medium accidentally invited something nasty into the home.
Inadvertently opened a door that they could not close. The medium invited the spirits in, and with them came something which attacked my mother.
Andrea continued by saying, "Whatever attacked my mother was not of this world. It spoke through her in a language that was not of this planet." Terrifying, right? Nothing, though, is more terrifying than the legend of Bathsheba Sherman. The Harrisville house is allegedly haunted by a number of ghosts, some of which we've already discussed. The most prominent, however, is Bathsheba Sherman. Born in Rhode Island, the woman married fellow Rhode Islander Judson Sherman in 1844, and later the pair had 3 children that died before the age of 7 and a surviving child, Herbert. Suspicion around Bathsheba grew. A lot of people thought the woman was a witch. This happened when a child mysteriously died in her care. It seems that the child's head had been stabbed with a sewing needle. Bathsheba died an old woman, and it's said that her body literally turned to stone on her death. Witch. When the Perron family lived on the property, the mother Carolyn said that she was sitting on the sofa once when she felt like she'd been stabbed. She looked down and she had a wound. When she examined it, it looked as if a large sewing needle had impaled her. When Ed and Lorraine Warren visited the home, they claimed to have strongly felt the witch's presence. It's said that Bathsheba Sherman cursed the land so that whoever lived on it in the future would die. I guess we're all destined to die though, so I don't know. Okay, so all this being said, it seems like the Harrisville haunting was actually kind of nothing, because when asked to compare the Harrisville farmhouse to the Amityville house, another famous Ed and Lorraine Warren case, it seems that Lorraine Warren had this to say: Amityville was horrible, honey. It was absolutely horrible. She said, it followed us straight across the country. I don't even like to talk about it. I'll never go to the Amityville house again. You don't know how long my career is, and that is the only one. So yeah, I mean, I guess Harrisville. There's not a patch on Amityville, so instead of making a part 2 to this video, perhaps we ought to create a top 10 scary occurrences that happened at the real life Amityville house. I don't know though, I'm kinda scared. Maybe I'll need even more colour for that video.
At number 10, we have a UK family home. So Nye 75 was just a child when her family moved from the US to the UK. In the UK, the family bought an old house. Like, still had lead pipes for water type of old. So they were only 6, but they do remember their experiences. They saw bright lights in the corner of rooms at night, and they heard footsteps on floorboards, even though they had carpeted flooring. Nye 75 would be woken up by a little girl at night that danced on their dresser. They themselves were terrified. Now, they had workmen working on the house to update it that had odd experiences too. They had tools being moved and the feeling of being watched. The scariest event at the house was when Nye 75's sister's friend came over for a sleepover. She woke the whole house screaming, saying a little girl came into her room and pulled her from her bed. She refused to ever come back. Nye 75 said they fixed the problem by acknowledging the ghosts and treating them like family. Just kind of walking in and being, "Hello, how are you all doing today?" to an empty house. Just like I do. At number 9, Shadows Through Doors. So this story comes from Denholm 2. When they were around 9 or 10 years old, they lived with their dad in an old house. It was a large house from the 1800s. Every once in a while they would hear footsteps or voices, and one night it got even scarier. Only they and their dad was home, and they woke up to the door of their room just wide open. And it wasn't usually open, they kept it just fully shut. So they shifted their attention to the end of their bed and saw a large shadow-like figure watching them from the end of the bed. It was around 7 feet tall. Now, they say when the figure noticed them seeing it, it melted into the floor and the door slammed shut. They, after this, felt traumatized. Now, when they asked their dad if he went into their room because maybe this could be a trick of the light, he denied it. They said their dad is not a man for jokes too. Number 8, the maid of the house. So this next one is from Reddit user Twigsnapper's uncle. So the uncle's house was supposedly haunted by the stableman and maid of the family that used to own it. The uncle had a friend, and the friend of that friend stay over one time. The friend of a friend saw a maid bringing towels downstairs when she was waking up, and then again bringing a percolator down. So at that point, she was just impressed by the uncle hiring staff, as he was a neurologist with a habit of spending just a little extra. But then when she went downstairs to see the uncle and friend chatting at the table, she asked where the maid was. She figured the maid was just making breakfast, but after the uncle figured out who she was talking about, he pointed out a picture. She said, "That was the maid, like that's the picture. Where is she?" And he laughed and said that she had been dead for 100 years. That was the maid that haunted the house. On to number 7, a scary experience with a friendly ghost. So back when user Toenail Collector was a teen, their family was remodeling an old house. They were working on their truck that was only supported by a jack at the time, which they point out is not smart. At the moment, they had no reason to get out from under the vehicle, but they suddenly felt an overwhelming urge to get out from under it. Barely a moment passed after they moved out from under it, and the jack slipped and the truck fell to the ground. If they were still under the truck, bad news. So it freaked out their dad since he thought they were under it, but the haunting part comes from their mom's reaction. They told her, and she just started weeping, since the previous owner had died in the driveway. So maybe the mysterious force that made them feel like they needed to leave underneath the truck was the previous owner. On to number 6, a knock upon the door. Redditor Weathercrow said they had a bunch of different experiences, but I'll stick to one story they said. Weathercrow said they had a reoccurring incident. They kept hearing voices of family members that just weren't home. So this could be in the form of hearing their parents fighting, or their brother and their parents fighting, but it would always be on a different floor from them, downstairs when they were upstairs and vice versa. They had one experience where it happened on the same floor and it was very close to them. They were brushing their teeth with the bathroom door shut. There was a knock on the door and their dad saying their name in a teasing voice. But they opened the door and he wasn't there. Plus they went to talk to their mom and she said he had gone to work hours ago. Then right after they shut the door, they heard more knocking and didn't open the door again, which is good for them. I wouldn't. That's just creepy. Number 5, haunted college house. So Munchies lived in an old haunted college house that was so creepy that everyone moved out except them and one roommate. He had quite the highlight reel of experiences there. He only ever had sleep paralysis in that house of anywhere he had ever slept. Plus, if something happened, it would smell like strong, flowery, old lady style perfume if it was a strange experience. And then he had 2 different experiences at 3 a.m. First, he woke up at 3 a.m. because his roommate's door kept opening and slamming shut, and he yelled at his roommate to stop it, and it did. But he remembered he was the only one home that weekend. So who was making the noise? Who knows? Then the beads he had hanging outside his door began to swing violently but synchronized against his door frame. At that point, he just curled up into fetal position until it stopped about half an hour later. Then the next time he woke up at 3 a.m., it was because he heard someone playing Nintendo really, really loud. Thinking it was another college kid playing on their Nintendo system who just broke in, he took a bat and walked towards where the Nintendo was kept in the house. It kept getting louder and louder as he approached. Once he opened the door to that room, it was completely quiet. Even though, moments ago, it was loud enough to wake him up. But let's move on. Number 4, T-Ghost. In Reddit user Signal Fire's house in New Jersey, they had their own 3 a.m. experience. They woke up at 3 a.m. after falling asleep on their couch. They could hear a noise getting louder and louder. They turned to see their kettle boiling all on its own. They said their kettle has a button that you push down and it glows blue, and they could see that the button had been pressed. But they didn't do it, and they didn't live with anyone else. With it being the middle of the night, when you may have a foggy head, they said out loud, "But I don't want tea or coffee." And then the kettle just clicked right off. And then right after, they wrote that they felt guilty as if it was a friendly ghost making an offer and they just refused it. Which I would feel the same. So this happened again during the day with a friend present, and Signal Fire felt relieved it wasn't all in their head. And then again later at night, the kettle went off around 4 a.m. and they yelled out, "Please stop boiling the kettle, we have people asleep upstairs," and it clicked off again. And at this point they say, okay, maybe it's a coincidence the kettle is a bit off, but with it happening 3 times, do you really think so? Let's move to number 3, what's in the attic. So Redditor economy_cactus refused to go upstairs in their house by the time they were about 8. They were exploring the attic-like closets that were up there with a friend when they were young, when they had kind of a creepy experience. They were crawling across the space and they saw a blonde girl sitting in the corner. They said she seemed friendly, silent, and she was wearing a nice dress. But they said they were beyond terrified and left the closet. After that experience, they avoided the closets, but every once in a while, lost toys would turn up in there. The doors would swing open if they went up to grab something, and it just kind of creeped them out. They tried to take their dog up there once to take on the monster, and the dog just didn't want to go. So when they moved out, when they were about 10, it was less than a week before the next family that moved in called. They asked the family if that house was haunted because their daughter was saying that she plays with a blonde-haired girl at night. Just like the one they described. Number 2, what's in the corner? So Finn Cobb's wife and him moved into their great-aunt's old home that was built in the 50s. There were some strange and creepy things happening for a bit, but nothing totally untowards. Then, after his aunt passed away, things started getting more strange. His son would wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning crying. The cat would go into his room and stare at the top corner of his wall. The dogs would growl outside the door. And yes, this is not too off, but then it got worse. They were watching their nephew and he was in their son's room, giggling. The nephew was pointing at the same top corner and just creepy giggling. Then his son began to say things like, "I don't want to go to bed, he gets mad," or "the shadow went over there." And at that point, Finn Cobb was feeling more and more of a presence he couldn't really explain. Then He was woken up 4 nights in a row by his fire alarm going off at 3:01 a.m. And it would only go off for 3 times and then stop. And then shortly after all this, they were creeped out enough that they moved to another house and they were all sleeping better at that point. Last but not least, number 1, Mr. Longneck. So Ambren on Reddit lives in a house that was built in the 20s. Her toddler daughter began pointing out the actions of a figure she saw in 2017. In the first instance, her daughter was 2 and pointed across the room asking who that guy was. Her daughter said he was hiding, but there was no one there. But again and again, this figure popped up in a conversation over the next couple months, but it was kind of more so joked about as that guy. But then in early 2018, around sleep time, another figure was possibly brought into play. While her daughter was about to go to sleep beside her mom, she said, "It's just me and you and him and her." And so not only that guy, him, but also her. Who's her? But then, moving on in the timeline, a name was said. Mr. Longneck. And so the daughter had a fixation with necks because she was about 2 or 3 and some people do that, so that may have been a factor. But Ambren decided she would ask some more questions about Mr. Longneck, figure out some details about what her daughter was talking about. So here it is. He is a grown-up, he is nice but scary and wears a monster clothes and a hat. He comes to the house in the afternoon, he knocks on the patio door and walks through the kitchen. Sometimes he brings a friend, the her from earlier, a little girl with yellow hair. Whenever Ambren's daughter talks about it, she isn't scared, but the family has saged the house just in case, because if you try to imagine a figure with just a long neck, it can kind of come across really creepy when they've been hanging out with your toddler daughter for a while.